Now, Bright, we go back to Bright, and then we start the discussion on Torentco with Bright Simmons. As you heard in my introduction, if you are just joining us and you missed the point on that, as you heard in my introduction, the Tema Oil Refinery, basically government, is seeking the approval of the PPA, that's the Public Procurement Authority, to lease its production assets to private company. The company is known as Torentco. Torentco is said to have no track record in the petroleum or refinery industry. It was formed only in January, as ASEP tells us, and it is fronted by people in government or associated with the government. And it is supposed to do this, take over this state asset and do the refinery. If it does, it is going to be paying an annual rent to the to TOR in a little in excess of 13 million US dollars. It is supposed to, as it were, invest $22 million to revamp the refinery to be able to do this 6 years contract that it is seeking. Well, the government or TOR says this is a good thing that they are in and trying to get, but they have not clinched it yet. ASEP and Imani cry smoke and mirrors. And as I said earlier, the deal appears to remind them of PDS. So how do we know the truth? So we want to examine the red flags that have been raised by these CSOs. We start with Bright Simmons. Hello, Bright.
Thank you, Samson. Not to relitigate the ECG issue, but we have to leave your viewers under no confusion. Over the last couple of months, in the last couple of years, the situation as far as UCG's ability to remit back into the cash waterfall mechanism so everybody else can get paid has been getting worse. How much they're actually putting in, how much invoices are being paid, have been getting worse. We have situations where in some months they don't even remit 25% of invoice value. So that is the facts. Okay, respect of TOR, we have to, like usual, start with some framing, some contextual framing, some context. So we start off with the history of TOR itself. And TOR was set up in the 1960s, in 1963. And at that time, Ghana didn't have capacity in this area. So foreign investors from Italy, primarily the same company that today is called ENI or ENI, came over, and the government allowed them on a strategic basis to set up the refinery, own it, and operate it. So at that time, TOR was 100% owned by foreign investors in Ghana in 1963. In the 1970s, as you know, we tried to revamp incrementalism and other such, national ideological projects. And one of the things that we thought was important was that the government has to own critical industries. So in the middle of 1970, we started that process. By 1977, TOR had more or less been nationalized, and the government of Ghana now owned it. Most of the problems then started because obviously, if you don't have the working capital, you don't have the technology capacity, you were going to begin to start having challenges. And by 1989, there been number of shutdowns and number of problems. So the government began a reform program and renamed the Tema Oil Refinery in 1991. And then since then, there's been an attempt to try and fix TOR's problems. Those problems manifest primarily in the area of money to actually operate the refinery, money to buy crude, and technical capacity to ensure that we are maintaining efficiency in production. When you put in some crude oil, you get out the right amount of refined products that you are looking for to do. So we started to borrow money to try and achieve this. And in the 1990s, we went to South Korea. We got about $200 million that allowed us to expand the capacity a little bit to about 45,000 barrels. We then went, after the government lost power, the new government also, because TOR is a recurring problem, attempted to fix the issues and went back to the South Koreans because we knew them. Samsung came on board. We managed to get export tax credit and the likes in South Korea. And we spent another $230 million roughly revamping the CDU and building a new module that allows you to extract some of the refined items that sometimes TOR doesn't generate well enough. By the time this new government came in and started this latest attempt to revamp the refinery, the debt build-up was around $300 million. So in 2003, they introduced a levy, a special levy, to try and clear the debt. And in trying to clear that debt, they created conditions in which, to my mind, we postponed some of the solutions that we ought to have implemented from the outset. And one of them is that we have a situation where that refinery, to a certain extent, is not efficient by design. And so even when we spent all that money that I mentioned to you in the early 2000s to try and reform it and to revamp it, plant utilization, how much of the entire plant capacity is being utilized. So if, for instance, the plant can generate 100 gallons of petrol, it normally does a lot more aviation fuel and things like that, but let's assume it's petrol. If it's 100 gallons of petrol, in actual fact, because of all manner of reasons, it will be doing maybe 20. Some of that could be due to the fact that they don't have crude, etc., but a lot of the time it's also because of technical capacity itself. And so you see that it's only in 2004 that we got close to something in the region of about 80% of plant utilization. And then it was downhill since then, until we shut down in 2021, April, because the management felt that the business model that was being operated was at that time making things worse. And that business model was that because nobody would lend TOR money, because TOR couldn't achieve enough revenue so that it can buy its own crude or go to the bank and get an overdraft to buy crude, it started to do a tolling operation. If you have your crude, you bring it, we refine it, we give you the product back, and you pay us for every barrel that we refine. The problem was that sometimes, when they refine it, the promised amount of refined output is not what they generate. And so they begin to build new set of losses. And so the feeling was that the amount of money that ought to be paid also had to be higher. It was about $2.5. And the management at that time felt, something like $4.5 per barrel would be reasonable. So they shut it down. They canceled the contract with Woodfields. And then we've literally not been able to turn it back on again because we can't seem to make progress. The other thing that has also become very associated with the TOR story is this tendency for shady things to happen at TOR. Products get missing. People bring bunkered oil from somewhere, or the complaints that bunkered oil is being brought from somewhere, or off spec, which means crude that does not meet the specifications of TOR gets dumped in the refinery. There have been so many problems where we've had national security try and investigate, and it's a mess, a true mess. The last point in terms of where have we come from is that we've announced bailouts over and over again. The last major one was sometime in, I think, 2012, when we said, BNP Paribas and a bunch of banks were going to come together and give TOR $900 million. But pay attention to the numbers I'm mentioning, because all the time I'm mentioning these numbers for a reason. It gives you a sense of the scale of the problem, given what others have looked at and what they felt, was required in terms of money to try and fix the problem. So last time they said, okay, $900 million was going to come in and that was going to give TOR a lease of life. In simple terms, TOR's problems are primarily twofold. It's very broke and it's very untrusted for all the reasons that I've discussed. We've spent in the last couple of years, maybe the last less than a decade, we've generated almost $1 billion in various levies, from the original TOR levy to the component in the ESLA, the energy sector levy that we now dedicate to TOR. We've generated over $1 billion. All those taxes, instead of going to TOR directly to clear the debt, expand the refinery, introduce management reform so the government stops appointing cronies whenever it feels like, having a truly independent board, by either passing regulations that literally prevent the president from intervening and prevent ministers from intervening. We've refused to do any of those things, right? So what has happened is that everybody doesn't trust TOR. Ghana Commercial Bank nearly collapsed because of TOR. The government had to find $300 million and build Ghana Commercial Bank a decade ago. We have a situation where fundamentally, therefore, TOR is not trusted by anyone. Now, the question that you must ask is, will the Torentco deal address those two fundamental issues? The fact that the refinery is broke and perpetually broke, and two, the fact that nobody respects and trusts the refinery. Here is where we have a challenge there. We think that because they went about this the wrong way, using single sourcing, not ensuring transparency, not doing international competitive tendering, the fact that the promoters behind it are not well known in the energy financing and operation space. They may have done other things elsewhere, but they are not very well known in the industry. And the typically when you're doing an SPV, it's the people behind the SPV that matter, because the SPV is just a shell company. So every focus is on who is the one promoting that SPV. And none of the people that are, we've found out are behind it have that level of trust in the industry as major operators. Thirdly, where they say they will get the crude from brings up all the issues that I've discussed about shady crude being brought to TOR in the past. They have a company called Pontus Trading. Our initial due diligence suggests that Pontus Trading has big issues in Sri Lanka. Some affiliate of it appears to be evading US sanctions. There's a lot of murkiness about Pontus Trading, which they've not come out to be able to explain properly to anybody who is doing due diligence now. And there's a number of due diligence processes that are ongoing, none of which have been very favorable. The last bit, which is very important, is that the capital sources are not clear. I mean, if you're doing an SPV, your ability to raise money is important. And the way we've looked into things, the government has proposed a company called Legacy Capital as potential source of money. When we do our limited due diligence, it turns out that this company has been accused of having, or at least the founder of this company has been accused of having links with the Russian mafia. Too much making it. Secondly, they keep changing the name of the entity. So they started off saying it was Decimal Capital.
Right.
Then the person who was promoting Decimal Capital got into trouble with the American government for apparently, at least according to the American government, bribing Ghanaian government officials. Therefore, they changed the name of the entity and then they transferred the capital to, the shareholding to another director and created a new entity that they were then calling Bay Bridge. Then they created another entity called Torentco. It's just a messy shift in terms of identity and things like that. So what are we saying? What we're saying is that private sector participation is essential. Where TOR is now, with Central Refinery about to come on board with 120,000 barrels, it would be, a miracle if TOR survives. But if it's to survive, it's going to require private sector participation. We don't dispute that. So on that leg of the strategy, we agree with the government and with the TOR board and management. Also, we don't run the TOR board and management, right? We don't run TOR. If the board and management says this is their best they're going to get, we have to give them some benefit of the doubt. But here are our issues. One, you need more trustworthy consortium partners, people that are known. They've mentioned Vitol. When we've checked, Vitol have said we don't have a contract with them. We've not decided on anything yet. We are just waiting to see. That is not very reassuring. The source of working capital has to be better identified. So we don't have situations where people use, sanctioned money and things like that to come in, because that will worsen TOR's reputational issues. The amount that they say they're going to spend to revamp the refinery, $22 million, seems completely at odds with everything we've been told about TOR in the past. So why do they believe that $22 million will be enough? The fees that they are proposing to pay, when you analyze it, it comes down to less than what TOR was making in 2021, when the management said it was too little and shut the refinery down. So why is this all of a sudden useful? And then lastly, the workers, the new, I say they will do a secondment agreement, which is fine, but the secondment agreement is not clear whether they are taking all the 480 or 500 or so workers that are at TOR now, etc. So our argument is pretty simple.
All right.
There has to be better transparency and accountability, more money injected in, and an effort to fix the issues at TOR fundamental, which means government clearing the debt. So those are our issues with the...
Thank you so very much. And as we understand, there are issues, but this is a company that has been making losses. It has not been known to make any profit. This is a company, and as we know, familiar with our state-owned enterprises in Ghana, square pegs, round holes, almost all the time, just a few. The kinds of Dubik Mahames and Alex Mold sitting here, very rare to find in the state-owned enterprises. And all they do is to plunge us into debt upon debt. And we continue to watch. There is so much corruption, like the trust issues with TOR. How is this missing things and always all the time? It never changes. Well, so how come that a new, as it were, the interim management committee that was set up in 2021 June to oversee this process, there were, as we understand, they received 2 proposals from local and international companies. The companies, as we understood, were Intercontinental Energy Dubai and Africa Finch Dubai. The expression of interest continued, and the board of directors, as it were, eventually, this is where we are. Where one company that is being dealt with, beginning with Decimal Capital, which, as Bright mentioned, a former head or a former boss of that entity, was said to be the one fronting it, and he had issues with the US government as far as some criminal processes are concerned. So he left the entity, and then these other entities are coming up, but it is understood that they all have these people behind it fronting, perhaps for some, politicians and so on and so forth. We'll take a quick break. We'll be right back and hear from Alex and also Ejapa Mensah, who should join us by now. We'll be right back. You're welcome back. This is Newsfile. It's your most authoritative news analysis platform. And here on Newsfile, we put Ghana first. Alhaj Suleiman says, while I love the ECGC CEO for his affability, it is not right for him to say, because Bright's graphics graphs are up to 2019, they are outdated. No. In statistics and analysis, 2 time points are a good basis to project into the future and even back project into the past. Bright has shown over 10 time points in his analysis. Alhaj Suleiman, thanks for your message. Do Hoto says, I wish all CEOs and directors of SOEs will be truthful like the managing director of ECG, Mr. Mahama. He admits the ECG has problems and is putting in measures to address them. We are seeing improvement. Kudos to Mr. Mahama. Desmond Israel says the interaction between Alex Mould and the new ECG head is the kind of interaction we need to grow this country. I confess, I was sitting here and I couldn't help but admire, the camaraderie between the two of them and how they went about dealing with the facts. Desmond Israel, you said that. Samuel Lamptey says, I like the new CEO, ECG MD. Looks like he's genuinely working hard and needs all our support to improve things at the company. Such an admirable interaction between him and Mr. Alex Mould. Lovely stuff. Then at King Gauss, 77, the ECG MD, Mahama, is really a solid guy. For what meets the eye, the man is up to the task. I pray he succeeds. No unnecessary politics. And finally, Honorable Edu Tete says, this ECG man is the only one I have seen speak about issues without politicizing. He looks better, serious, and ready to serve. A leader that is worth his leadership. All right, all of you, thank you so very much. So somehow they abandoned the issues and they're looking at the two of you and how you were, interacting and praising, because when you do right, we see. So what do you say about this Torentco deal for the TOR?
Well, Samson, something has to be very clear, and we'll get back to this. I'm going to make a statement, and it's that most badly managed or politically controlled SOEs that have weak management, CEOs and boards, are drawn into certain transactions that extract value for certain individuals who have huge influence in governments at the highest level. This is state capture. We saw it in PDS. We've seen it in different transactions making, and this is the latest. We saw it in gold for oil as well, and we are seeing it in this Torentco transaction. Now, anybody who has done refinery economics before knows that the value of your products that you produce from the crude oil has to be far higher than the cost of the crude oil, and your operating costs, your consumption and losses in the refinery. Otherwise, you're going to make losses. Now, Tamale Refinery has been making losses for one reason and one reason only. Its consumption and losses, which should be less than 5%, far exceed 12 to 14%. No refinery on this earth with consumption and losses, that means the fuel you use to heat up the refinery and work, and the losses that are permitted, can go above 6% or 7% in modern times, because it's a very competitive market. The crude oil, the petroleum product sale market is a very competitive market, and you don't make large margins. So you have to be efficient. The reason why Tamale Refinery has been making losses, and many people don't know this, Tamale Refinery was a tolling refinery up to 1996. Tamale Refinery never made a loss till 1996, when it started buying its own crude oil, stopped the tolling agreement with GMPC, who was the only BDC then, and they started producing on their own. From that day, they started making losses because they did not have the capacity to do that. Now, if you look at the transaction itself, we know that due diligence has not been done on this transaction. The transaction is murky, so sourcing is not been open, and one of the things that you do in a transaction, you have to have the strength of the off-taker. They have to have the credit worthiness to be able to pay when you produce the product. You also have to have the financial backing to be able to buy the crude oil. You also have to have an understanding of the Tamale Refinery operations and its losses. Now, the biggest issue in Tamale Refinery right now is the operations. Tamale Refinery will start and shut down within a few days. It takes 48 hours and fuel. That costs a lot of money to start up the refinery again. But it will get faulty in a few days because a process audit was done in 2016 by engineers who came up and told us exactly what needed to be done in Tamale Refinery so that our processes and our instrumentation and our tank farm and all the piping and our gantry would operate in a continuous basis. We have not spent that money. It's going to take us $300 to $500 million to get Tamale Oil Refinery in a position where it will make the refinery make profits. Now, looking at this deal, I just saw $22 million they wanted to spend. In this refinery, where did they get that number from? That's why I say the due diligence has not been done. This transaction is just an extraction transaction to extract some value, bring in crude oil at high prices, and make losses at Tamale Refinery without Tamale Refinery getting better. We want a partner that is going to make Tamale Oil Refinery better. That is going to make our refinery be able to work continuously. Refineries work continuously for 18 months before they shut down. Yes, there will be some hiccups here and there. But if a refinery doesn't work continuously, it's going to make losses. So my thing is that due diligence has not been done. I heard Bright saying that private sector participation undoubtedly and undisputedly is going to happen. And I think, yes, it's going to happen because I don't know where government is going to get $300 to $500 million from taxpayers' money, because no bank is going to finance this if there's no skin in the game. If the government doesn't put money in, no financial institution is going to finance it. The financial institutions may finance the financing of the working capital, which includes crude oil and the money needed to pay workers and other things on these operations. But the money that is going to be used to revamp Tamale Refinery has to come from equity holders. Government may, and the reason why it hasn't happened is because government hasn't been able to get $300 or $500 million to inject it to Tamale Refinery. And they have to make a decision. When I mentioned it the other day, somebody said, I said we should privatize Tamale Refinery. We should inject money into Tamale Refinery through equity. How is that going to happen? Is it going to happen from a lease? Is it going to happen from privatization? Or is government going to use its own resources, taxpayers' money to do that? That is the conundrum that the government faces right now.
Right. So the CSOs raise CSOs, I thought I said SOEs. They raise issues, and you see at the start, the reason I say they seem to smell a PDS is that you see almost everything like the PDS situation, and they made noise. They did everything. Government simply ignored them and proceeded, and then had X, in its face. Now,
and why do you think so? There's only one reason. There are people high up in government who are influencing this transaction for one reason and one reason alone, and that's state capture. And this deal needs to be stopped.
What do you know? When they say the former CEO of TOR, Mr. Asante Berko, is the man behind Decimal Capital, which, you know, later on they are now saying, okay, after he got arrested in the UK because the US made a request for his arrest, and he's charged with corrupting Ghanaian officials in a Turkish power plant deal. The suggestion now is that he transferred his shares to Mr. Darko, Michael Darko, you know, and I've seen letters, you see Michael Darko writing as the director and so on, very recent letters too. Are these hardcore facts, or they are just, you know, the Imani and ASEP, as it were, being suspicious? Bright, if you can, I should be directing that question to you. Hello, Bright.
Hello.
Yes.
Samson, sorry for that. So, no, it's fact because it's been admitted by the board of Tamale Refinery. The board and management have confirmed those facts.
So, have you also been able to confirm for a fact that they cannot get what is required? What you talk about, what's the fund again? The need to be assured of the money that they need to invest. How do you confirm that, you know, they don't have it? Did I lose Bright again?
Sorry, because there have been due diligence efforts to try and establish the source of funding, which have not been successful. And we know that because, obviously, we have our sources within TOR.
Okay. I think Bright needs to take leave of us. If you have to leave us, thank you very much. However, let me go to Ejapa Mensah if he's back with us, and to hear how government feels about all of this, because this is TOR that is leading the process, but there will be the need for the central government's buy-in. Hello, Mr. Mensah.
Yes, Samson. I've been here monitoring the discussion.
Right.
That was started by Bright with his presentation, and subsequently Alex doing his usual politicking. You see, I feel rather sad that, yes, there's a transaction that is contemplated. Some questions have come up. And rather than ask those legitimate questions, the sense that I get is the suspicion that somebody wants to, if you like, overreach the state and do something untoward. You make accusations of lack of transparency for a process that evolved from the management through the board, through the ministry, through the State Interest and Governance Authority, through the Attorney General's Department, through the Ministry of Finance, through PPA. And you say it is embroiled in some opacity. When all these state institutions have had a say or a look at the entirety of the process. Why would actors of state, for example, want to take over an asset that, from the presentation that's been made by Bright and the politicking by Alex Moore, is a loss-making entity? Why would anybody want to take over that? And yet, the conclusion is that, yes, a private sector participation would be required, because the equity conversation that Alex introduced, where is the government of Ghana going to get the money to invest in TOR, which has all the leakages that we know has been associated with the entity for all these years? I read a statement by one of the CSOs, and the conclusion was really apt. That we all say we want Ghanaian participation in our development space, in our economic environment. Yet, when a Ghanaian puts up a proposal that goes through due process and some traction, then everybody raises a question about the political connection of individuals that are involved. It's really sad. Okay, I have always maintained that yes, civil society by all means raise critical questions, question of capital sources and all that. It's exactly the work that the board and management did, that they submitted through the Ministry of Energy to State Interest and Governance Authority, which by law is the shareholder of TOR, to evaluate and take a decision. TOR, the documents were then submitted to the Attorney General to evaluate. The AG said, look, the lease agreement I've seen, but I want to see the operations and maintenance agreement. TOR was written to. They submitted it. It went to the Attorney General. Attorney General evaluated it. And indeed, PPA, when they evaluated the process, said, no, clearly, any partnership, any JV, any lease agreement would rather be in the nature of the Public-Private Partnership Act. And so refer it to the Ministry of Finance's Private Investment Secretariat, which is mandated to deal with transactions of this nature, for them to provide a view on it. And that process is ongoing. Yet the focus is on some thinking that somebody wants to, as it were, overreach the state. And I hear Alex make referrals to PDS. What transpired in PDS? The government of Ghana had commenced a process as far back as 2004, I believe, or 2014, when Mr. Mahama was president. PDS and all the entities had been shortlisted under the NDC. The NPP comes, takes over the process from where the NDC had left off, and said that, look, rather than 80-20 in favor of Ghanaian foreign ratio, change the dynamics and make it 51-49 so that the Ghanaian can have a greater stake in the entity. Ultimately, the guarantee that they issue, the company that issued it to back the transaction, comes to say that, look, this did not come from proper authority or custody. As the government of Ghana then results from the transaction. And all of a sudden, everybody is reading wrongdoing in that transaction. I failed to get it. Samson, I was on your show. Recall having a discussion on this PDS, and I pointed out to you the agreement and the power that Parliament had given to the Ministry of Finance to amend sections of the transaction when people were calling for parliamentary approval. You recall? In fact, I recall hearing you subsequently on the Joy FM breakfast show saying that it was when I appeared on your show that you took the liberty to read the entirety of the agreement and that government of Ghana had done no wrong. You recall? Samson, you recall that conversation? And Alex sits there and talks about go for oil. What is the opacity about the go for oil transaction? What is it?
Okay.
So it's about time that, look, I'm always interested in people who ask legitimate questions. But to try and politicize everything and to read
So
because you have that mindset.
All right.
Everybody else has that kind of mindset. I can assure the good people of Ghana who are listening to us.
Right.
There's nothing untoward that either the board and management, as far as I know, have done. There's nothing untoward that the Ministry of Energy, the Attorney General's part, the Ministry of Finance has done. This transaction is required. The board and staff of TOR, who usually raise issues about these matters, have all written in paper. And the right thing to be done to ensure that that aspect of this country is safeguarded.
Thank you so very much, Ejapa Mensah. We have just like a minute to go. What can you say?
When somebody doesn't have anything to say about a transaction, he goes on to a transaction he knows about. So Mensah, who was a party to PDS,
you have like 30 seconds.
Has diverted. This transaction is murky, it smells bad, and it should be rejected by the people of Ghana. And the proper due diligence should be done on anybody who is bringing a transaction to Ghana. And we should have transparency, and most importantly, in such a transaction, you should look at the strength of the off-takers and the strength of the people, the sponsors of the transaction, and whether they have the financial backing to do this. Nothing shows here that they have the financial backing. Nothing shows here that the sponsors are strong or they even understand refining.
Okay, thank you very much. Alex
they cannot
Kofi
procure the
Mensah
expertise
Mold,
who understand refining to do it on their behalf.
former CEO of the Ghana, of the GMPC, Bright Simmons, Honorary Vice President Imani Africa, Andrew Ejapa-Mensah, MP Secondee and Deputy Minister for Energy. Earlier, you heard us also engage Samuel Dubik Mahama, Managing Director of the Electricity Company of Ghana, and we also spoke to Dr. Kojo Pumpuni Asante, Director, Programs and Policy Engagement, CDD Ghana. I'm Samson Ladia Yanini. This is where we draw the curtains for today. Join us again next week for another edition of Newsfile. My outfit, as always, is by Habil's Couture. If you are looking for the best captains, that is where to go. Thank you. Have a good afternoon.